Did you know that there's a specific keyboard in the market that makes super gliding easier, allows you to loot super fast, and flat out just upgrades your movement just by purchasing it? This morning I was made aware of a tweet made by famous Twitter impression farmer Inhuman. Not that he's the first, but he is certainly one of the many under the impression that using a Wooting 60HE is cheating, drawing parallels to the Strike Pack, which is a controller mod to reduce recoil, and more through automation. And what's funny is, as someone who was sent a Wooting to try out a few months ago, once again, thank you so much Wooting for actually hooking me up, I had the same first impression once I received it. I've been using this keyboard every day since I received it, and I can safely say, I can see why people think it's borderline cheating. And before giving my own opinion and takes on this, let's start with what the Wooting 60HE can do that other keyboards on the market, as far as I'm aware, currently can't. Also, getting this out of the way, this is not an ad, this is not a purchase video, these are my genuine thoughts on the keyboard and its functionality, so hang with me, okay? And of course, we're not going to get into all the technicalities of how this keyboard works because I don't know how it works. But to simplify things, one big deal with the Wooting is that it has something called a tachyon mode, which optimizes your keyboard for input speed and consistency, where every key press responds as fast as possible, with a consistent latency, so time for activation, between the key press on the keyboard and the signal being sent to the computer. And many other keyboards on the market, and even gaming keyboards from large well-known brands, as I understand it, do not have this, and instead send the signal at varying intervals. And while these intervals vary by maybe a few milliseconds, every millisecond is key if you're working with very delicate movement techniques with a hundredths of a second of a timing. What I want to focus on with this video is what advantage does using a keyboard like this actually get you, because there are a few, and many definitely do feel like cheating. What makes the Wooting special are the switches on the keyboard themselves. They are completely analog and fully customizable, which lets you set the specific actuation point per key. Okay, that's a weird word. What does it mean? Well, by having access to fidget the setting where exactly the key does trigger as you do a key press, you can decide whether the key will activate once you push it down 1 millimeter, or a tenth of a millimeter, or all the way down, unlike other keyboards that only have one digital input once you bottom them out. The faster response time makes movement feel great and almost like you're constantly playing Horizon with the amount of lurches you can hit thanks to the more consistent timing. This also comes in handy when you're trying to do something like hit a Superglide, which, for those who don't know, is a very difficult to pull off movement technique sequence where you have to climb a ledge, hit a jump, and crouch almost at the same time, with about 1 to 3 frames of a difference to then launch you forward with a sudden 500 velocity boost. This very tiny gap makes it very hard to consistently pull off, especially on a traditional or even a gaming keyboard. And it's even harder to hit a Superglide on 240 frames per second instead of 60 because there are way more frames, but the timing remains the same. And of course, having a well-performing keyboard with a 1 millisecond response time will allow you to nail that timing a lot more consistently. So what's so special about that? It's a good keyboard. Here's where the analog feature that I mentioned earlier comes into play. Because by changing your actuation point to be slightly different between your crouch key and your space key, which in my case the spacebar activates at 1 millimeter down and my crouch at 0.8 millimeters down, instead of trying to hit that delicate timing of 1/240th of a second, I can simply press space and control at the same time and hit a Superglide more often than if I tried mashing both, trying to get lucky with it. And while the customizable analog switches are very useful, one of my personal favorite features has nothing to do with Superglides, it's something called the rapid fire trigger. In short, a rapid fire trigger allows you to do as many keyboard presses as your finger allows you to, without needing to fully bottom out or to reset the keyboard's switch. And that might not seem like a lot, but if you ever go into a game or a firing range, and you try hoovering up the loot scattered around the floor, the looting speed you can pull off with rapid fire trigger could be comparable to looting with your scroll wheel, without the clunkiness of bottoming out a switch holding you back. And of course, if anyone watching this video needs like a good tip or tutorial how to set up a Wooting keyboard, make sure to hit that subscribe button because I will cover how to properly set up the keyboard in a future video. This video isn't like an ad or a tutorial, I just want to lay the foundation so you guys understand how it works, so I can properly give my thoughts on whether I believe that the keyboard is cheating or not. And I want to make an important distinction here. All of the features that I've recently mentioned are just settings. Things that make it easier for you to pull off features and bypass limitations that held back keyboards in the past. And as I understand it, the Wooting utility app does have other features that I won't dive too deep into, that do allow you to set up macros and ways to do multiple key presses by only using one button, which would make things like supergliding that much easier, since instead of pressing 2 keys, you could just hit 1. But that's something you could do on any PC peripheral software or even using a hotkey script, and isn't something that's only doable on a Wooting. Macros are also generally considered automation, as the computer does inputs for you, which I personally, and definitely Respawn in many cases, consider cheating, and for that reason alone, I won't dive into it any longer. Because I want to share the thoughts on the Wooting itself. I have received this question quite a few times over at my stream over at twitch.tv/Ottr, and honestly, like I said in the start of this video, I do see how it can be considered cheating. More consistent superglides feel way too good to be true, and the rapid fire is a massive advantage locked behind that $174 and $99 paywall. And it is no secret that to a certain extent, gaming is pretty pay to win.
There, I said it.
Obviously, a nice $5,000 PC won't magically make you better at the game, and if you're bad, spending a lot of money on a new graphics card only allows you to be bad, but in HD. However, in many cases, a player's performance could be held back by external things like their frames per second, their ping, their monitor, and in this case, their peripherals. And making these upgrades can be a way to eliminate these factors holding you back. But if we do, as some commenters have suggested, an attempt banning keyboards like the Wooting from the game, just because it gives you an inherent advantage, you'd have to start banning 4040p monitors, good computer components such as a beefy 4090, which starts at a very beefy $15 and $99 MSRP, and whatever you can think of, just because it is an improvement of already existing technology and gives some sort of advantage. I would love if everyone on PC were on an even playing ground, but there are just so many things that can vary that it's not a realistic outcome to ever hope for. If you want an experience where nobody has any form of pay to win or advantage, the closest you can get is a console where everyone has the same internal components, but there's still plenty of things that can vary, without bringing up the obvious cheats like the Chronos or the Strike Pack that automate parts of the game for you. You can play on your console using a monitor, which gives you a better input lag, or you could play on a better connection for lower and more consistent stable ping, and you could have a nice headset to help you hear what goes on in the game. Maybe not if you play Apex, at that point it doesn't matter. But arguing that buying one thing for the sake of doing better, if that one thing isn't like a cheat, like an aimbot, Chrono Strike Pack, automation, it's just putting energy where it isn't needed. If you want everyone to have an even playing ground, maybe spend your efforts dismantling capitalism instead of stopping them from buying a fancy Dutch keyboard. And as I believe I've hinted in this video, I also believe that this new keyboard is a sign of the technology improving. Wooting isn't a cheat, it's just ahead of the curve. If the interest is high enough, come 1 or a few years, analog switches might be the standard. I mean, when I was a teenager, like 10 years ago, all the gamers that I knew used something called membrane keyboards. Even the standard gaming branded keyboard wasn't mechanical, or it wasn't red switches or cherry blues or greens or whatever. They were all just boring membrane keyboards with fancy lights on them. Mechanical keyboards were incredibly rare, and they were really expensive, much unlike today where the mechanical switches are the standard for any mid to high keyboard. There's a massive difference between mechanical switches and membrane switches performance-wise, and those mechanical keyboards were a huge advantage back then compared to those membrane ones, much like the Wooting is to the mechanical switches that we have today. I don't think that using a Wooting keyboard to improve your manual input is cheating, and I definitely cannot compare it to a Strike Pack. Thank you so much for listening. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and of course, I'll see you all tomorrow.